Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.
Welcome to True Crime to Go. What can I get for you?
I'd love to hear the story of a con man, but a very optimistic one. A con man that reaches for the stars.
Pull up to the second window and we'll see you next crime.
Welcome to True Crime to Go. I am John here with Jamie, and boy, I gotta say, never a more intriguing opening.
Well, it's definitely true. It is a story of a guy who tries to weasel himself into a dynasty of a family name here in America.
All right, man. Well, guys, this is a true crime story in 10 minutes or less, and why don't you get the ball rolling, sir?
This is a con man. He had several different names, and we'll talk about some of those. His real name is Christian Karl Gerhartsreiter.
I'm glad you didn't make me say that first.
It may not even be close.
Can we agree to call him something? What are we calling him from now on?
Well, he went by, for the purpose of this story, Clark Rockefeller. Rockefeller, one of the founding families of the industrial nation of America.
So for this guy, Clark, and like this time of year, Clark is like the perfect name too. Clark Griswold. Anyway, Clark Rockefeller masqueraded as a member of one of America's most elite families, and he was duping everyone from high society socialites to law enforcement. But it's not just the lies that made this story so fascinating. It's the crimes that came to light as his elaborate ruse unraveled.
You serious, Clark? There it is. Yeah, this is going to take us through deception. There's going to be a kidnapping, a murder mystery in 10 minutes or less. Talk about optimistic. So are we. So Rockefeller, with his previous name, I'll call him Christian for this sentence, and then we'll go back to Rockefeller, was born in 1961 in a small town in Germany, as if you couldn't tell by the last name. From an early age, he was fascinated with power and wealth and living the high life. He was of a modest family, but he had dreams of the lifestyles of the rich and famous.
In the late 1970s, he migrated over to the United States. I guess immigrated would probably be the appropriate term, but it was under the pretense of being a foreign exchange student. So, I mean, really, you could say he was here for a brief while and then was expected to go back. But that's really where our story picks up with him, because he cut ties with his host family and began reinventing himself.
He started going by the name Chris Chichester. Chris Chichester. One of those. But obviously, this was one of his many aliases during the time. And this was in California in the 80s. He was running in wealthy social circles in California. And he became connected to a couple, John and Linda Sohas, who lived in San Marino, California.
And this connection would later come back to haunt him. In 1985, John and Linda mysteriously disappeared. While authorities suspected foul play, they didn't have enough evidence to link him to the crime. Shortly after their disappearance, he left California, abandoning the alias Christopher Chichester for a new identity.
That's when he started going by Clark Rockefeller, and he resurfaced over on the East Coast. Now, this is obviously in an effort to appear to be some kind of relative or descendant from the Rockefellers.
So let's talk about Clark Rockefeller and this persona. This wasn't just a casual lie. He fully immersed himself in the role. He dressed the part, he spoke with an air of sophistication, and dropped just enough vague details about his Rockefeller heritage to make people believe that this was the real deal.
And it worked. People believed he was part of this family. He gained access to elite social circles in New York City and Boston, Massachusetts, where he was seen as charming, while maybe a little eccentric and an aristocrat in the community. Aristocats is a great movie. And in 1995, his lies took him to the next level. He met and married a woman named Sandra Boss, who is a highly successful businesswoman of her own right, who was a consultant at McKinsey and Company.
So the marriage gave him an air of legitimacy, but it wasn't long before the cracks started to appear. Sandra later revealed that he was controlling and manipulative during their marriage. He discouraged her from contacting her family, isolated her socially, and lived off of her income while pretending to manage a fortune.
Despite his strange behavior, the couple continued their relationship and had a daughter named Ray in 2001. By 2007, Sandra had had enough of the lies. She constantly saw Clark Rockefeller lose jobs and lose money and essentially mooch off of her. So she filed for divorce and to get full custody of their daughter, leaving him with absolutely nothing beside this fake name.
Now, this is where things take a rather dark and dramatic turn. In 2008, while during a supervised visitation with his daughter in Boston, he actually kidnapped his daughter and fled.
He managed to evade authorities for days using disguises, using aliases. This is something he had done for a long time. And a nationwide manhunt ensued. The FBI automatically gets involved with kidnappings of children, thanks to Charles Lindbergh's baby being kidnapped, and they kind of changed policies to make sure the FBI was involved because they usually move between states. And this happened. They tracked him to an apartment in Baltimore, Maryland, where they arrested him and rescued his daughter, Ray.
The kidnapping was really the beginning of the end for Clark. As investigators dug into his past, they were able to uncover the trail of lies that he had been weaving for decades, and it did not take long for them to link him back to that missing persons case in California, the Sohos case.
In 94, nearly a decade after John and Linda Sohos had disappeared, bones were discovered in their backyard of their former house. While some of the remains were identified as John's, they were not able to tie any of it to the body of Linda.
So in 2011, Clark Rockefeller, or whatever his real name is, I can't keep track of it at this point, went on trial for John Sohos's murder, and prosecutors argued that he killed John during his time as Christopher Chrischester and buried the body in the backyard.
The evidence was all circumstantial, but it was compelling. Witnesses were able to place Rockefeller at their home around the time of their disappearance, and the distinctive type of bag that was used to wrap the remains was traced directly back to Clark.
So the jury was convinced, and they convicted Chris Christopher, or whatever his name is, and found him guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced him to 27 years to life in prison.
He was never convicted of the murder of Linda. They didn't have a body. But this is kind of the end of the line for a guy who lived his entire life in high, elite, wealthy circles just by lying about who he was. In some ways, his ability to transform himself was impressive, but it's when he turned to violence, kidnapping, and murder that, it's a good thing that he was stopped. I think there would have been more of that.
It reminds me of the Leonardo DiCaprio movie, Catch Me If You Can, where that was a real life story where Leonardo was like faking and having all these different kinds of jobs and aliases and became wealthy. This is just a very dark version of that.
It really is. Yeah, that was the story of Frank Abagnale, and we have a full episode about his story. We also have a full episode about the Charles Lindbergh baby kidnapping. So if you're interested in following up on those two, you can. But this was the story of fake Rockefeller. And glad he is behind bars, and it goes to show you that no matter how much you mooch, crime don't pay.
Yeah, Jamie, this is a very interesting story, and I really appreciate it.
It's been a crime story in 10 minutes or less.
Would you like crime with that?
Recently, a new client called me and started by saying, "Mr. Morgan, I really need your help, but I'm just a nobody." Those words stunned me, and I immediately called him back, and we're now helping him and his family after a terrible accident. I'm John Morgan of Morgan & Morgan. Everybody who comes to our firm at their time of need is a somebody. I grew up poor, but my grandmother was like a queen to us. At Morgan & Morgan, our goal is to level the playing field for you and your family at your time of need. The insurance company has unlimited money and resources. You need a firm who can fight them toe-to-toe. For right at 30 years, we have fought them in courtrooms throughout America. Our results speak for themselves. And always remember this, everybody is a somebody, and nobody is a nobody. Visit forthepeople.com to learn about our firm, Morgan & Morgan, for the people.
Injured? Visit forthepeople.com for an office near you.
You've listened to True Crimecast, distributed by Stoveleg Media. Check out stoveleg.com to find out more about your hosts and to find other podcasts to listen to. Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.